Well, hey, welcome back, Prosperity Collabs. My name's Chris Mueller, and on this podcast, we dive into achievement at the highest level, bringing you top achievers from across a variety of fields, from real estate to nonprofit and everywhere in between. On today's show, I am really excited to bring in Paul Herrera. Now, Paul works with a number of the local realtor associations within the Inland Empire, California. And specifically what he does is governmental affairs. So he is a liaison between those local associations and the government in Sacramento, keeping our associations and the homeowners of this region appraised on what's going on legislatively that will affect them and affect their home value. So I think this is just a really interesting conversation, whether you're a real estate agent, you're a homeowner, or you're an investor. This is one you do not want to miss. So keep listening. Here's my conversation with Paul Herrera. Well, hey, welcome back to Prosperity Collabs. My name is Chris Mueller, and on this show, we really talk to people who are achieving at a high level across multiple industries. So it's everyone from professional athletes to professional real estate salespeople. Today, we're going to be speaking to Paul Herrera from the Inland Valley Association of Realtors. Paul specifically deals with government affairs on behalf of the Realtor Association, and so I am looking forward to a very interesting conversation about everything happening in California, but honestly, I don't know Paul's bio well enough to do much more here, so I'm going to introduce him right now. Paul, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah.
My background, I actually work for 4 realtor associations.
Okay.
So I represent the Inland Valley Association of Realtors, the Inland Gateway Association of Realtors, California Desert Association of Realtors, and the East Valley Association of Realtors. About 12,000 members combined, covering most of the Inland Empire with the exception of Southwest Riverside and the High Desert area. I'm a consultant to each of those associations, working in local, state, and federal issues, working with our state association, national associations on things at those levels of government. Background-wise, I started out as a reporter, worked in Florida for newspapers, worked for the press enterprise locally, then worked in government. I was communications director for the San Bernardino County Economic Development Agency before going to IVAR initially, and then branching out to work with multiple associations. So my role is to try to affect legislation that's being written that impacts real estate and realtors, yourselves and your clients, or to help develop some of that or find solutions. We're really in a role of a problem solver, I think, with the realtors and the way that they focus their advocacy efforts, which is a really nice place to be.
Yeah.
But that's my background, and obviously we have a lot of issues to resolve at the moment.
Yeah. Well, realtors are in the news a lot right now.
Yeah.
And there's been the settlements with the National Organization of Realtors, and some people walk away with this, we don't need to belong to the National Association anymore, or we don't need to belong to, or whatever, all these different things have come out. And I always reply to that, like, that's a really short-sighted view, because when COVID happened, the world shut down, but realtors continue to work. And a lot of that was because we've got people like yourself, people who are really advocating on behalf of realtors and on the real estate industry, on homeowners, to make sure that we're allowed to continue to do what we do. I mean, it's really important, the role that the associations have.
COVID, interesting you raise that example, because I was in the middle of that.
Yeah.
COVID happens. We had all these plans, all these things we were trying to get accomplished. I had travel to Sacramento planned. And then Friday the 13th of March is the stay-at-home order. And I spend the next day just crossing things off, trying to figure out, okay, what happens now? And just canceling stuff. And for about 4 or 5 days, I had absolutely no idea what it is I'd be working on now other than canceling things. And then I realized the transaction has to continue.
Yeah.
In fact, I was in escrow at that moment.
Yeah, okay, so that's meaningful.
Yeah, and scheduling home inspection, how are we going to do that? How are we going to sign loan docs? How this is going to work, right? And I started calling brokers, asking, how are you guys doing this? How's recording going to happen? And over the next week, we sat down and I wrote an entire list and said, give me every single step in which a human being does anything in a transaction, from the moment a listing agreement is signed to the moment that the final documents are recorded, and everything in between. And we had to figure out a workaround each item.
Yeah.
And that's how I spent the next month and a half overall, trying to find those ways, because the recorder's office was shut down. They had to figure out a way to remote record documents. Mm-hmm. How do you, at that time, you technically couldn't go anywhere. You couldn't leave your house, technically, right? Yeah. Okay. We had to lobby to get industry essential industry designation, mm-hmm. so that realtors could leave their home, in order to do their jobs. And the very last step that I recall, when we thought we had resolved everything, working in the Coachella Valley, there's a lot of foreign owners that have second homes, Canadians in particular. Mm-hmm. And what they couldn't figure out was, if the Canadians wanted to sell their home, they needed to go to the U.S. Embassy in order to complete the document signing, right, with a notary. Embassy was closed. Yeah. So we had to work with a member of Congress and the State Department to find a workaround that step, so that there was another option for doc signing in May, June of 2020. So that was the work that we did at that stage. And within, 45 days, we had a full process. We even had to, invent open house procedures, which weren't open houses, but it was scheduled showings, and things that the Department of Health would accept. And then work with the governor's office. It was so many little things that we took for granted, and we had to reinvent on the fly.
Yeah. Well, and again, I think it's really important to acknowledge that there were industry standards that were being created on the fly.
Yeah.
And could you imagine if you were an independent brokerage and you had to try to advocate for and create that and implement that all yourself, you would have been just absolutely screwed.
I mean, your call wouldn't be returned. I mean, you call the recorder's office as an individual and say, I need to find a way to record these documents, but you sent all your staff home. Right. They'd say, yeah, sorry. Right. I mean, home.
Conceivably, somebody like Keller Williams, who's the largest brand in the world, could maybe use a little bit of push, right?
Right.
But maybe, because we don't have advocacy, departments, what I mean? But the associations do, right? The association plays a really strong role. I think that's just it's something I wanted to touch on. I have got a wide range of things I want to talk about today with you.
Yeah.
And one obviously is where the news, right? Mm-hmm. And I know it's not necessarily legislative, but I think it's on top of everybody's mind, is particularly in the real estate industry, but also if you're not in real estate, if you're a real estate investor, if you're a homeowner, how does the NAR settlements affect the way real estate transactions are going to be done in California? I know you're having conversations at a higher level. What are you seeing what's your read on that right now? I know it's not necessarily what you do, but obviously you're in the thick of it, right? So,
right. There's a couple answers to this question, and there's a lot of questions behind that. Yeah. So let's start here. The short answer is we don't know.
Yeah.
We have a proposed framework of a settlement that still has to be submitted to a court for approval. And the court has to then approve that settlement with the details attached. Right. That's one step, and that step doesn't yet exist. But we have pretty good detail based on what NAR has released. Mm-hmm. Then the next piece beyond that is, even after it's accepted, real estate's not conducted uniformly across the country. State laws have a huge impact on how the agency relationship works. Mm-hmm. In various states, there are states that don't have sales agents, they only have brokers. There are states where attorneys are involved in the process. It just varies where you go. So how that settlement affects California is a different question. Mm-hmm. And we don't know the answer to that. Yeah. Even the day that the settlement was announced, there was a question as to whether it implied that CRMLS, which is the MLS of much of California, would be impacted, because the settlement says specifically realtor owned or association owned MLSs, right? Yeah. And CRMLS is not one of those. But the short answer is it does. But how exactly, again, not sure. Those things still have to happen. And until we have detail on how those things happen, we're going to struggle to effectively answer specifically our members who really want kind of a step-by-step application. I do this, then I do this, then I do this, and I'm good, right? Right. That's not an answer we can give. Right. We're going to have to reinterpret, because we're in a position now where a very stable and reliable method of working now has to be reinvented in a different way, while looking out for the interests of a number of parties, whose interests we're not sure how to look out for at this moment. So that's both a short and a long answer, but neither one of them is really an answer to what you just asked me.
Yeah. It's interesting that the settlement covers, association-owned MLSs, CRMLS not being one.
Mm-hmm.
So in theory, they could say, oh, we're still going to offer compensation. We're still going to do this. I think that just opens them up for the lawsuit. So they're probably just going to, I would imagine, just do what the settlements are saying. I mean, that's probably what they're being advised to do, my guess. Right. I mean,
it'd be my guess, but I'd be guessing.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. I want to emphasize something you said, that the system as is in California has been working, right? Yeah. And one of the things that I see, with this settlement that is concerning is, how does this impact buyers?
Yeah.
How does it impact underserved communities, right? And, if the onus is now on the buyer to pay the commission to the buyer's agent directly, right? And there are lending regulations that will now not allow it to be structured in, or only allowed to be structured, to what percentage of concession. Mm-hmm. That's really going to hit those underserved populations quite a bit. What happens if someone shows up at your open house? You brought this up before. Someone shows up at an open house and they're not represented, and they say, I want to make an offer. What is the responsibility now of the listing agent to represent them? These are big question marks, right?
Yeah. Yeah, let's break down the experience of a first-time buyer, because that's really who we're concerned about here. Mm-hmm. Underserved. I don't want to say low income, because if you have low income, you're not going to be able to afford anything, to purchase anyway. Sure. But those first-time buyers trying to get on the first rung of home ownership,
right? The entry-level house.
Yeah, the FHA borrower who doesn't have a bunch of extra cash lying around to bring into the transaction. They're struggling just to get into the median home price or even entry-level home price
which
in
is
California.
Already the most competitive part of the market.
Yes.
And always is. Yeah.
Extremely difficult to get into.
Right. Yeah.
So now you have a buyer who has to navigate a very complex process that has been lawyered to death. Mm-hmm. You can see it in the hundreds of pages of various documents that we've had to create, forms, each one constantly updated because the laws constantly change, or applicable court cases and court precedent impacts each one of those things. Yeah. And without any compensation to a representative on behalf of that buyer is being asked to navigate that process on their own. Mm-hmm. Now, the second option is they can pay out of pocket and have a broker represent them, who can navigate them through the transactions, counter offers, and go through the documents and make sure they're not agreeing to something that's not in their best interest. Right. Or they can hire an attorney and pay them by the hour. Right. Which is plenty expensive enough as it is. Oh, yeah. Right. Yeah. A buyer may not have that option, especially the more underserved communities, especially people who are just sliding in under affordability. Mm-hmm. So now what do you have? You have somebody who is going to be agreeing to things and may not know what they just agreed to. Right. Contingency issues. What are they waiving? What rights and opportunities are they waiving? If their lending falls through, what are the consequences? What is their earnest money? What's going to happen there if things come undone? If deadlines aren't met? If they're aware that deadlines have to function in a certain way? What the realtors have done that I think is remarkable over the last generation is the realtors have built a frictionless, or as friction-free as possible, marketplace for housing. Buyers, sellers coming together within databases, within negotiated documents, within all these things that any one of those could trip up a transaction, even from the beginning of just making known that a home was for sale, mm-hmm. to the final steps and everything in between that has to technically be handled. And created the system in which these things happen to the buyer and seller, it seems almost automatically. Mm-hmm. It's just procedural. And it seems like very little is actually happening, when the reality is that what allows the RPA to be a system of checkboxes, an initial here, initial there, had to be created from legislative language or court cases or liability or insurance documents or lending documents. Mm-hmm. All this had to be invented and created and built. You pull those out of transactions, you move the professionals out of the transaction, And now you have nothing but liability that's built between buyer and seller. You can have a buyer and seller, there's nothing that requires them to use any representation whatsoever. They can just sit across the table from each other and say, I'll give you $900,000 for the property. It's in a bag here next to me.
Yeah.
I can push this across the table to you and you can sign over title and we'll go record it together.
Yeah.
You could certainly do that. I have absolutely no idea how you would, but you certainly could do that, right? And then everybody can sue everybody else next week over the things that they did not work out over that table.
Right.
And it can and will happen and has happened, where people made agreements and understanding for sale by owner scenarios can happen where, like, I didn't know I was supposed to give that, that particular bit of information to the buyer. Realtors know all those things. And so it happens, again, it seems almost automatically. It's second nature to you guys. I'm not a realtor. I work with realtors every single day. Whenever I purchase a home, I've used a realtor because I don't work in your documents every day. And you guys can just say, yeah, it's box 18. I don't know what box 18 is. I got to look at it, and I can look at it and I can understand it, but I can be tripped up by it very quickly. And so I need the services of realtors. And I spend all day long talking to you guys and trying to work on the issues and trying to get direction on what to do. Right. So the buyer's in a very precarious position if we don't find a way to get them represented, and nobody's going to want to represent them if they're not being compensated for it.
Right.
And that's the problem we need to solve.
Yeah. Yeah. You bring up a good point in terms of the contract. It's very easy to miss that almost every single paragraph, clause, item is a lawsuit.
Yeah.
It's one that already happened.
Yep.
Right. And so either the courts or the legislature stepped in and they said, oh, no, this needs to be clarified. Right.
Right.
And, when something is being done well, it looks easy.
Yeah.
Right. That doesn't mean it's easy. Right. It just means it's being done well. Right? And you take professionals out of that, and now it is the Wild West. And every survey done, we just look at history. Every homeowners have always been able to sell their homes. Right. You've always been able to do a for sale by owner, and people don't. Right. Because they inherently know that this purchase is fraught with risk. And I want someone protecting my interests in it, right?
Yeah.
To lead me through the inspection process, to lead me through the lending process, to lead me through the escrow, all of those things. Because if I make a mistake on any of those, it's going to cost me a lot of money. Or it's going to cost me a lot of headache, right?
Yeah.
How do we continue to protect buyers? Because nobody wants to work for free.
Yeah.
Right?
And the example, what you really want to spend time doing now is, as we figure out what the appropriate questions are, is think through, just like we did with COVID, and said, show me every single step in the process and how that's going to work. We need to look at every step in the process for these buyers and how that happens next.
Yeah.
If you're a buyer and you're not working with an agent, you can't afford it, so you're going to figure out how to buy a home on your own. Number one, how do you know it's for sale?
Yeah.
As long as MLSs are in place and MLS rules exist and data integrity exists, then those feeds into Zillow and other sites will be useful. If we get to a place in which people pull out of those MLSs, they don't want to be subject to data integrity rules, and listings that sold 2 months ago are still up on their website, you're a member of the public just calling around and hearing, just like if you call an apartment and say, well, you guys, I want to rent the apartment. Oh, it rented 2 months ago.
Yeah.
I don't know why it's still on the website.
Oh, yeah.
Because no one's holding accountable that data, that it be accurate and up to date. If you get to that place with the marketplace for homes, the buyer is going to be making a bunch of phone calls. And the final result's going to be, I'm just going to look for open house signs and go and drop in.
Yeah.
Okay, great. You found a house. You like it. You'll make an offer. How do you make an offer? You don't have an agent with access to an RPA or the basic standard documents who can write an offer and send it in with the series of conditions that are part of that negotiation.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't know, as just a member of the public, what I need to include in the offer, other than a price, and that's about it.
Right.
And the address,
Right.
right? So someone comes to your open house and hands you a piece of paper and says, "Here's my offer, $900,000 for this home." That means absolutely nothing to you and to the seller.
Yeah.
Not until you start to address the pages and pages of conditions that affect that offer. What's included, what's not included, what are our closing timeframes, what are our performance expectations on either side.
Right.
So the seller now, one reaction could be, listen, we don't accept offers that way. I simply cannot accept that.
Mm-hmm.
But what's more likely is you say, thank you for the offer. This is unorthodox for us and we have a lot to consider. So I'm going to have to present it to my seller and ask what they want to do.
Mm-hmm.
Seller says, yeah, I need all my interests taken care of. So let's put that into proper format. The broker now writes as a counter with every checkbox done, sends it back to the buyer and says, here's our counter.
Mm-hmm.
And buyer does what now?
Right.
Exactly. With this document they don't even know existed,
Right.
much less understand.
Right.
And what they're agreeing to in terms of performance expectations on their behalf,
Mm-hmm.
and the consequences of that is something that they either have to pay somebody. Now we're back to the first problem.
Right.
They either got to find money to pay somebody to interpret for them.
Right.
That could be a broker. It could be a lawyer.
Right.
But there's going to be cost involved.
Mm-hmm.
But what they cannot expect is that the sales agent, the listing broker, is going to walk them through it.
Right.
That's because, again, they're not being compensated for that. And you're not responsible for that part of the transaction. So that buyer's on their own.
Right.
If we don't fix that particular issue, to be totally honest with you, I don't think the buyer is going to get the offer accepted because the seller is going to be in a position where they say, I don't even know what I'm working with here.
Right.
So I need to be able to close the transaction reliably.
Yeah.
But if I do, well, here's all my conditions. We're going to close in 30 days. If you don't close in 30 days, then you start paying penalties on top of that. If you don't meet these conditions, if lending doesn't come through, if you don't, you're going to waive inspection, you're going to waive, all these contingencies. And if you miss it, then I keep your 10 grand. All these things that the counter can include, and the buyer may or may not understand that they're agreeing to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's a gap of information, which makes the transaction inherently unfair.
Right.
One side is information, the other side is drowning.
Mm-hmm.
If we don't fix that with whatever this resolution is going to be, then we'll put the buyer in a rough place. And I don't think the courts want that. I don't think the Department of Justice wants that.
It's a step back. I mean, we're basically stepping back to 1994, when essentially the selling agent was an agent of the listing agent, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we've stepped back now. You said something I wanted to just underline, because people say, well, we don't need this because we got Zillow. We don't need this because we got Redfin. We don't need this because we got homes.com. All of those services rely on the MLSs, which were essentially created by realtors, right, to facilitate the process. And if you take the realtors and the MLSs out, none of those aggregators have the ability to do what they do. We're now relying on agents to upload to whatever platform they choose. And so there's no unified depository information, or those just become MLSs, right? And then, and so, but again, without the association to say everybody has to use X, who guarantees it's all going to be there, right? We've taken a step back. Well, potentially we've taken a step back in the free distribution of information. And it's a very interesting place to be right now.
Well, just think about it this way. Data integrity tries to ensure that agents regularly update the information. If a home goes pending, they don't have a week to update that information and receive inquiries for next week.
Right.
They need to do it.
You say data integrity. I hear fines. Right?
Yeah.
But it's true. It's the same thing. But Zillow doesn't have any authority to fine me.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So,
Exactly. Right. So, I mean, any kind of integrity can only be sustained through some enforcement mechanism.
Right.
laws and rules don't exist if they're not enforced. Right. So if you take that away and now the data is a week old, what good is a week old data on a new listing to a buyer in this marketplace? It doesn't mean anything to them. They're to be calling on a bunch of listings that are under contract right now. If you go back in time a little bit.
Well, it's a value to an unscrupulous agent who's using it to advertise to draw on those buyers on properties, And this, we see this in the auto industry, right? You call in that car that was advertised, it's not there anymore. There was only one of them at that price.
Right.
But the real estate industry, we've really been protected from that. You can't have the sort of dead listing as your honey trap.
Right.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, that's an issue that doesn't get replaced if it's not. I can't imagine what the scenario would be. Could the legislature pass laws that say you need to, maintain accurate data? You can't use it. Sure. Are they going to, put it on a 24-hour clock? Absolutely not. Right. There's nobody who's going to be able to enforce at that level.
Yeah, the enforcement mechanism. Like who has the bandwidth to enforce that? Right. At a state level.
Right.
Yeah. So it's going to have to be delegated to county, and it's a nightmare. Yeah. Totally.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. So that does not get replaced. If issues like that, the basic infrastructure of the transaction, again, the work that realtors have done to create this frictionless system starts to come apart to the detriment of the home seller whose property does not have the same kind of exposure. If it doesn't have this widely distributed listing system. And now what's the most effective way? I mean, you look at commercial real estate. In commercial real estate, there is not a centralized MLS. There's several data systems, and a lot of properties aren't there. And if you talk to brokers who are working with clients looking for space on the consumer side, not on the client side, that's not the owner of the building, they'll say, "Hey, just drive around the area, look at buildings, and take pictures of signs and send them to me." Because that's as effective as me look. I can look for spots where there's 1,500 square feet of, for your law office in this, Class B building. Right. But you'd be much better served to just drive around.
Right. Well, and the instance of, let's say, pocket listing in commercial, right? You're calling the sign as an agent, and they're not calling you back because they've got no reason to call you back. Yeah. Right. Because they're just waiting for somebody to drive around, see it, and call them directly, and then they're going to double end or they're going to have a commission all themselves. Right. Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
So it absolutely is. I think it's what we've done here, judicially, is we created a situation that is now infinitely more complex and needs to be figured out. The good news is, I think realtors at every level, we still have a very strong interest in keeping it smooth for our clients, right? Yeah. And I think that's the greatest chance that we're going to get a smooth functioning system, is that if we stay strong as a organizationally, and advocate for policy, legislation, whatever that makes sense for the consumer, it will get that.
Yeah. If the realtor organizations splinter and everyone starts to grab for their own, we're going to have a real mess. Not to mention a lot of duplicated work and a whole lot of additional cost, and at a time when there's less revenue potentially coming in. Right. What's important at this stage is for the realtors to reorganize around a different set of new principles and operating procedures that rebuilds the frictionless marketplace. In California, one of the things that I wondered as the issue was being debated is that California has very strict disclosure laws and requirements. I don't know how it happens in other states, but in this state, we have fought a lot of those consumer protection battles over the years and updated our system. This is not a place where you're able to not properly disclose really anything. Right. So it should be easier in California to rebuild some of that. Right. The question is, what's that look like? We don't know right now. Right. But if the real estate industry organizes around this is important to build, we'll get there. Right. Maybe it'll take a little bit of time, but we'll get there because it's important to rebuild that trust and that what's really a trustless system that depends on cooperation.
Right.
If we fracture cooperation, we fracture the marketplace.
Yeah, 100% agree. So I think I've seen two reactions in the real estate agents I'm talking to. Hair on fire or denial. I don't think either one's good. I think we truly have to look at the value we provide to the consumer and how do we protect the homeowner in this process. And if we come from contribution in that sort of way, our industry will come out stronger. Right?
Yeah.
And I think that's definitely, I think that's what we will see. Because if there's anything we know about the real estate industry, it's resilient, and people will always need to buy or sell homes, right? That's always going to happen.
Yeah.
I want to shift a little bit because California is an interesting state. We're a state of booms and busts. I kind of feel like we have huge surpluses and then we're completely broke. We have plenty of water and then we're in a drought. What I mean? It seems like it just kind of comes and goes. COVID was a boom for us, right? As far as the state, we had huge surpluses in our finances, and now coming out of that, we're now facing some deficits in California. How's that going to affect the homeowner? How's that going to affect real estate in the state moving forward?
Well, it's hard to say because one of the issues is we don't know how long we're going to be in this deficit stage. California is highly dependent on high income earners to pay its bills. Your average W-2 earner, making median income, contributes relatively low amounts, even collectively, to the state budget as compared to an IPO that produces massive capital gains or huge sales of assets that appreciate in value. So because of that, that's our boom bust cycle when it comes to the budget. What's frustrating to many of us is that 2021, 22, 23, we have budget surpluses that cumulatively are like $250 billion. This year, we have a budget deficit projected around 80 or 90 billion at this stage. The numbers vary. So shouldn't we be just fine? Given the surpluses the last couple of years, there should really not be an issue. Well, but there is, because the state doesn't necessarily just hold on to the money. Right. It sees opportunities with surpluses to start investing in things that it hadn't done before. Negotiate more friendly terms with its public employees, a whole list of things that it wants to be able to do. And so the money is not necessarily there. We're in a better position than if it hadn't happened, but it's not there. Right. So what's it mean? Well, we can go to the most direct impact. We have the California Dream for All program in California that was created to provide down payment assistance to first-time home buyers who would otherwise have a very difficult time coming up with even basic affordability. Well, that program gets cut by $300 million.
Right, and already, it was like a drop in the bucket.
Yeah,
it came like that. It was so fast.
I think it was 12 days.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it lasted 12 days, and I don't think a penny even made it to Southern California.
Yeah, unbelievable.
So that gets cut by some 30 or 40%. So that 12 days, technically this year is going to last 30 days because they're going to do a lottery system. So rather than first come, first serve, after 30 days, they take in applications, lottery, and give out the money. Right. But it's almost lottery odds or moving that direction, at least scratcher's odds.
Yeah, so by the mega this weekend, you might have the best in chance.
Yeah. So that program gets cut, and you drop $300 million out of that program, and you have thousands of families that are now left out that might have otherwise been better served. So that's one part of it. The part that affects more people is if the state has prolonged deficits beyond just this year, it's going to look to raise taxes because it's got to pay bills. Right. And the state pays most of its bills on the backs of property owners, homeowners, not just from property taxes. We have relatively low tax rate in California, but to afford even a modest home in California, you've got to make well above the median income. So you are paying higher taxes as a whole. Right. We have two measures in November, both of which are designed to try to weaken Prop 13, which is the only thing that has kept taxation for homeowners stable for 45 years.
Okay, so for people who are not necessarily up to speed on that,
sure.
Prop 13.
Prop 13, pre-1978, California's property tax system was like many places, including Texas today, where you could have 2-3% rates taxed on your property year in, year out, and it fluctuated based on current market value.
Right.
So if your home went up in, say you bought a house, we bought a house in 2020, that pandemic offer, that was 875. 3 years later, it's worth easily 1.4 million, right? So pre-1978, our tax bill would have gone from like $11,000 right now to about $18,000, $17,000 or $18,000 based on the appreciation in the home. We fixed that with Prop 13 because we said, look, the home might double in value. You have not one more penny in your bank account.
Right.
You don't realize any of those gains.
Right.
And if it doubles in value this year and gets cut in half the following year, you pay these taxes, and the thing that doesn't even have that value doesn't carry it forward. So Prop 13 said, once you purchase a home, that's your affordability level. You bought it for $500,000, so that's the level, and the basic tax rate is 1%. Then it can only rise each year by a maximum of 2%. So that's why over time, if you hold your home for 30 years and property appreciates beyond that level, you might have, that same neighborhood, there's some homes that were bought for $20,000 50 years ago that are today assessed at like $110,000, right? But you have, there's a lot of military veterans there who bought their home when they were serving, and now the widow lives there. And there's actually several of these, and they can't afford a 12x increase in their property taxes and still afford their retirement.
Right.
So Prop 13 protects those things. It also said that you can't go out there and just borrow money and send a bill to taxpayers via bonds. And additional expansions of Prop 13 gave voters a right to approve new taxes with a 2/3 majority.
Right.
So all those things led to a stable tax rate where pre-1978, seniors were literally taxed out of their homes.
Right.
They could no longer afford the tax bill and they had to sell.
Right.
After 1978, that ended. Howard Jarvis leads that taxpayer revolt. The voters passed it by 64%. And every single version that has helped to solidify that decision has passed by similar measures.
Right.
About 2/3 of Californians look at it and say, yeah, it makes sense to not tax people out of their homes.
Okay. So you mentioned that there's some legislative action right now that appears to be designed to weaken Prop 13.
Yeah, there's 2 initiatives coming to the ballot that do exactly that come November. And I can't tell you, Prop 8, Prop 10, Prop 12.
Right.
We don't have that until August.
Okay.
But these are approved for the ballot.
Okay.
The first one, which legislatively was known as ACA 1, but will not be known as that on the ballot.
Right.
What it does is it takes that 2/3 threshold for new bonds and taxes and drops it to 55%.
Ooh.
So it makes it much easier to pass new taxes that will be assessed to homeowners.
Right.
In many cases, this is a local government wants to borrow $500 million for some project, and now we're going to send the bill to the homeowners as an assessment on their property taxes for the next 20 years. So that would be made much easier from 2/3 to 55%.
Right.
There's a little precedence for this because in California, we did change the law so that school construction bonds could be passed by 55%. And the realtors supported that because they saw it as an important investment in schools that were crumbling. Infrastructure was old. And so specifically for that purpose, that threshold was reduced. ACA 1 had a similar initial purpose. It was supposed to be for affordable housing and to address homelessness, two issues that California voters rank very highly as important. The problem is they added 3 more words at the end of that sentence. Those 3 words are, and other infrastructure, which now meant everything.
Right.
So what realtors said was, look, if you remove those 3 words and you stay true to the thing that you're trying to get accomplished, housing, affordable housing, and homelessness, we can talk about that. But if you just make it a blanket repeal of the protections in Prop 13, then we cannot do anything but oppose that. because of the impacts to our existing homeowners.
Right.
They wouldn't take that change, that amendment, and they passed it as is with the 55% across everything.
Yeah.
The second piece is called legislatively AC 13. What AC 13 does, it says, let's imagine we were trying to pass Prop 13 again. And or any legislation that says you need a 2/3 majority to do X. ACA 13 says in order for that to take effect, 2/3 of the voters or whatever threshold you create have to approve that same initiative. So by that standard, Prop 13 would not have passed. Prop 13 got 64% of voters to approve it, but it sets a standard of 2/3 that must do it.
So in order to pass legislation related to taxation, you need that's going to say, like, so say it said 2/3 majority, it has to pass by 2/3 majority.
Right.
If it said, I don't know, let's say 30% majority, the minority, you would have to pass by. Essentially, it's tying the rate it would need to pass by to whatever it would then put the constraint at.
It would have to be above 50%,
Yeah,
but yeah, you get the point of that.
My brain was working slow.
And what's particularly frustrating is that this 55% threshold that they're proposing doesn't have to pass by 55%. So what they do is they lower the threshold and then shut the door behind them so that we can never build it back.
Right. So they're lowering the threshold to pass a new tax, essentially.
Yeah.
And then raising the threshold
To put protections back. Yeah.
Yeah, that is that's a frustrating situation in California.
Yeah.
And those, but we don't know what those will be as far as legislatively, what they will be on the ballots yet.
It's correct.
ACA 13 and ACA
1.
Okay.
Yeah. So those two items are coming once they have a ballot designation, which they will at, I think, in July, August.
Okay.
Then at that point we can start saying, no on Prop 14, whatever it's going to be. And start addressing it. There will be a very broad campaign on both of these items.
Right.
CAR recently allocated $19 million to fighting these items and try to protect Prop 13 going forward.
Right. I have to say this because I don't want people to miss this. The Realtors Associations, they're advocating on behalf of tax or on behalf of homeowners here.
Yeah.
Right. It's not just an industry organization. This is about real estate in California. And this is for the benefit of every single home.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
One of the great things that I really enjoy working with realtors is that I have never been asked to go and lobby an issue that directly put $1 in a broker's pocket. We don't negotiate that way. What you guys focus on, what we focus on as organizations, is if it's good for the consumer, if it's good for the homeowner, if it's good for home ownership as a concept, then it's good for the industry. There is no California Association of Home Ownership that has any clout that I know of. You guys are it. The realtors are the ones that are walking the halls of Sacramento. Literally, we'll be doing that about 6 weeks from now at Legislative Day, and going to Congress and saying, on behalf of our clients, what we need is, and here's a list of things that will make their lives better. That's everything from the mortgage interest deduction to affordability programs to property rights and everything in between. If it benefits the homeowner, the realtors are supporting it, and they're the most powerful voice that are affecting it because nobody else speaks for just the standard homeowner in California.
Yeah. No, I think that's a point that's often missed, that there is no home ownership group, right? And so if you want advocacy on the part of homeowners, it's going to be a grassroots guy with a clipboard outside of your local bonds, or it's going to be realtors who are, ear to the ground on this industry, and they really do care about the state of housing in California.
Yeah,
absolutely. To that, kind of along those lines, I know that it's definitely something we're seeing in California. We do have a housing crisis.
Yeah.
We don't have enough homes. It seems like the response from Sacramento is, well, then build one in your backyard. I know a lot of communities are seeing a move towards high apartment buildings, condos. It's changing the character of a lot of communities. What's happening on that level? I mean, is there any movement towards getting more housing in California, or more infrastructure for housing? Because we always talk about water as a constant problem. Do
Yeah.
you see any movement there?
Sounded like a frustrated sigh, I'll be honest.
Yeah, those things that require money to be spent on a mass scale are, especially for California. California is not going to drop a bunch of cash into building infrastructure for certain areas. Now,
unless it's high-speed rail to nowhere. Sorry,
even then, it's the federal government doing most of the work.
Yeah.
That's I'm with you there, but so unless Uncle Sam is footing the bill, which apparently it can do so infinitely, I don't know where the money comes from for the infrastructure. So we're very pro housing as an organization. We support streamlining. We support making it easier for property owners to build and making it harder for cities and counties to put up arbitrary rules and procedures that stop that from happening. There's limits to that.
Sure.
To give you an example, last session, the legislature passes AB 1033, which is designed to allow ADUs to be sold separately as condominiums.
Yeah.
This thing's insane.
Yeah.
To imagine that a homeowner is going to want to build an ADU and then title it as a condo and sell it separately. It's not a scenario that, if you actually walk through, makes any sense for anybody.
No.
They might build an ADU and rent it out. That's certainly a possibility.
Sure.
And then if the person who moves in violates the lease, is creating a nuisance, list your problems there, they can say, hey, you know what? This lease is terminated. You violated your lease. You're going to leave now. As opposed to, they own the place.
Right.
And your backyard is now a shared living space.
Right.
This is a program that will be taken advantage of by investors who will knock
100%
knock on the door and say, I'll give you $10,000 if you sign this document allowing us to build an ADU in your backyard. And we own it. We try to get those protections in place. We weren't able to do so. The one thing we did get done is cities have to adopt it, and we have spoken to cities around here and told them, you don't want to do this. And they've told us, yeah, you're right, we don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So we're very pro-housing. We also see that there is such a thing as ludicrous allowances that just exist to benefit not homeowners, but in this case, investors or some other group, to the detriment potentially of those same homeowners. What's it going to take to build more housing? It's so difficult. There's the math is where the problem lies. City of Los Angeles put a report, I want to say 3 years ago, that which they tried to quantify the cost of building a unit of affordable housing. And what they came up with was a one-bedroom unit of attached affordable housing cost them about $600,000 and change to build. That's one unit, single bedroom attached. And generally speaking, across the state, it ranges between about $500,000 and over $1 million in some cases. Though I think the $1 million may include the wraparound services in some scenarios. So as long as those are the costs, based on regulation, not to mention the cost of delays of going through the permitting process and all these other things, before you have built the water infrastructure, roads, sidewalks, and everything else to get to this piece of land, assuming that all that's already served, well, you can't build a home that's affordable to someone making, $65,000 a year if the cost to build is $600,000.
Right.
So we got to figure that piece out.
Right.
How we do that, yes, we need to build a lot more housing, and we are. The problem is, what we really need is about 1 million units of housing that was built 30 years ago. We need a time machine to go back and, unmess up what we messed up when we started getting very rigid about what we could and could not do.
Well, I think it's also, we need, the crash, right?
Mm-hmm.
When the market crashed in 2006, 2008-ish, we stopped building.
Yeah.
Right. And building costs went up. Well, we weren't building, and now we're way underbuilt. And so it's catch up game. Right.
Yeah.
And you're right. It's very complicated to do in California because you have to navigate, depending on the county you're in, right? You've got to navigate that whole process and a lot of risk in it. But it seems like we're streamlining it for high occupancy housing. But it still seems like it's very difficult to do single family housing. So, like Inland Empire used to be where people came for that ownership of your single family home.
Yeah.
And that seems to be getting further and further away in the Inland Empire even now. Because the only opportunities that are or majority of the opportunities being built are either rental apartments or condominiums, which again, condominiums, your entry into the market, that's fine.
Yeah.
But it's not a fixed cost entry because your associations can go up and go up, And so it's a more challenging place to start from and say that entry level home. Right?
I mean, condominiums are probably going to be the entry level housing in California. Mm-hmm. It's hard to figure out how we do with single family homes. The days of being able to build a single family home on a lot, sell for $300,000 and turn a profit are long gone.
Right.
It's not possible today.
Right.
So how do we get there? We started envisioning a project. This is about 6 years ago. And so the numbers have to be updated. But back then, we had this idea of a project called the $300,000 house. And the reason we titled it that was that if you did the math, that's almost exactly what an individual at that time on those interest rates who made about $70,000 a year could afford. Mm-hmm. And so the question is, working backwards from that affordability level, how do you get this product?
Right.
It was really hard. We started to try to figure it out, and it was not possible with single family housing. Mm-hmm. Not unless you turn back the clock and built it 30 years ago.
Right. Or you do some kind of prefab or technology that's not quite there yet.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And there may be options down the line along those lines, but not under current regulations. Regulations will not allow you to get there. Right. So that's a math problem that we have yet to solve. Mm-hmm. The closest we can come to solving it is with attached multifamily. And if nothing else, if we can get people onto the first rung of homeownership, then you have move-up buyers in the future. Mm-hmm. If you look at San Diego has a lot more condominiums, right? And those become the single-family homeowners in the future. Mm-hmm. They're those condominiums that were $250,000 in 2005 are now selling for $650,000, $700,000, and the single-family home that was $700,000 is now $1.2 million. But if you have $500,000, $600,000 in equity, you have some options, and suddenly $1.5 million isn't crazy, right? Because you have the ability to get there if your income has gone up and you have some all this equity built up. Mm-hmm. Out here in the Inland Empire, we haven't really built for sale condominiums, right? So that is something that we can do more of. Mm-hmm. As long as rents are as high as they have been, it's hard to entice people to give up on making this a full rent product going forward.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And the next piece is you talked about infrastructure.
Yeah.
We've been talking to cities and counties about trying to get more of the infrastructure money from the federal government that was approved and seeing if we can use that to make more lots buildable. Mm-hmm. We can. One of the challenges is that California also has a number of climate goals in place that discourages building out into not infill properties, right? Moving out into other communities and building those up. The Inland Empire, a lot of this area, there wasn't much here.
Oh yeah.
We're sitting in Mission Grove. There,
oranges.
Yeah. So that land needs to be connected to the grid, to transportation, and that is not something that California is really friendly to at the moment.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting, and Paul, I honestly, man, I could just sit and talk at length with you. I just feel like we could go on, And I think this would be a great conversation to continue over a pint. But we're coming in about the hour mark, and so I do have to kind of be cognizant of that. And you can hear there's an event getting started in the next round of us coming over on the speakers. But man, thank you so much for coming in. I mean, this has just been an incredibly valuable conversation. To people in the real estate industry, sure, but to consumers in California to understand at a level how that affects them. I think this was just right on point. And in California, it's important that we see things like ACA 1 or ACA 13 on the horizon, because when they get here, they're going to come with a lot of advertising, a lot of buzz, a lot of spin.
Yeah.
When ultimately, if we can start the conversations now, right before the onslaught, then we're prepared to help the consumer really understand what it is they're saying yes to, or what it is they're saying no to, and they're going to have to make that decision. But as advocates for home ownership, we can help educate them to that. So thank you. I really appreciate the conversation.
Well, thank you. And I think it's important for the public to understand that your realtors don't stop working for you when the transaction is done. Mm-hmm. And through these efforts, they have spent really generations trying to establish not just the idea of the value of homeownership, but the actual value of homeownership, as an important, cornerstone of our communities. And that's work the realtors have done for a long time. I hope we continue to do it. I hope the cooperation is still there for a long, long time, because it's so important to our economy, to our families, to our region, to our communities, to our state, to our country.
Yeah, awesome. Well, hey, any last words before we sign off?
No, I think we covered everything except for the 30 pages of notes that we didn't get to.
We'll have to get that next time. And I really would love to have you back on, obviously this
anytime.
It's a regular thing. So, hey, thanks for tuning in. And if you heard something of value here today, go ahead and share that with a friend. The more information that's out there, the better we are as a community, and better we are as homeowners, and better we are as business owners. So we will catch you guys next time.